The courthouse security guard shoves the old man's shoulder roughly. "We don't allow homeless people sleeping on our benches. Gramps, move along before I call the cops." 83-year-old Frank Morrison clutches his worn duffel bag tighter as curious onlookers gather in the marble lobby, whispering and pointing at his threadbare clothes. What they can't see are the dog tags hidden beneath his faded flannel shirt tags that tell a story of brotherhood, sacrifice, and a promise he's been trying to keep for 60 years. If stories like Frank's remind you why we should never judge by appearances, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments. Have you ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly, only to discover there was so much more to their story? Your support helps me share more untold veteran stories that need to be heard. Frank Morrison had been coming to the same courthouse bench every Tuesday for 3 months. His clothes were clean but worn thin from years of washing. His gray beard needed trimming, and his hands shook slightly when he reached for his water bottle. To everyone passing by, he looked like just another elderly man down on his luck. But today was different. Today, the security guard had noticed him. Officer Bradley Chun, barely 30 and full of authority, strutted over to where Frank sat quietly reading a crumpled newspaper. The lobby was busy with lawyers, families, and court officials rushing between hearings. Perfect audience for what Chun planned to do. "You again, old man." Chun's voice carried across the marble floor. "I told you yesterday, this isn't a shelter. You can't keep camping out here like you own the place." Frank looked up slowly, his weathered face calm but tired. "I'm not causing any trouble, son. Just waiting for the records office to open." Chun laughed loud enough for everyone to hear. "Records office? What records could someone like you possibly need? You probably don't even remember your own name half the time." A small crowd began to form. Court clerks paused their conversations. A young mother pulled her children closer. A businessman in an expensive suit stopped checking his phone to watch the scene unfold. Frank tried to stand, but his arthritic knees made the movement slow and painful. Chun saw this as weakness. "Look at this guy. Can't even stand up properly." Chun addressed the crowd now, playing to his audience. "Probably hasn't paid taxes in decades, but here he is using our public building like his personal hotel." A woman in a business suit whispered to her colleague, "Someone should call social services. He clearly needs help." Another onlooker added, "These homeless veterans are everywhere now. It's really gotten out of hand." Frank's jaw tightened at the word veterans, but he said nothing. He reached for his duffel bag, hoping to leave quietly before things got worse. But Chun wasn't finished. "Oh no, don't you dare walk away from me when I'm talking to you." He grabbed Frank's arm roughly. "You think you can just ignore authority because you're old?" The crowd was growing larger now. Cell phones appeared, some people already recording what they expected to be another viral video of security dealing with a difficult homeless person. The courthouse lobby filled with whispers and judgment. "Let me see what's in that bag," Chun demanded, reaching for Frank's worn duffel. "Probably full of junk, and who knows what else." Frank pulled the bag protectively to his chest. "Please, son. There's nothing in here that concerns you. I just need to wait another hour for the records office. Nothing that concerns me." Chun's voice rose. "Everything in this building concerns me. I'm responsible for everyone's safety here, and you're making people uncomfortable." A tall man in a judge's robe had emerged from one of the courtrooms, drawn by the commotion. Several lawyers gathered near the information desk, shaking their heads and muttering about the homeless problem in the city. Chun, emboldened by the attention, decided to make his point crystal clear. "You want to know what I think? I think you're one of those guys who never worked a real day in his life. Probably lived off government handouts for decades, and now you expect us to take care of you." The words hit Frank like physical blows, but still he remained silent. His fingers unconsciously moved to his chest, touching something beneath his shirt. And another thing, Chung continued, now fully performing for his audience. I bet you never served your country either. Just another person who took the easy way out while better men went and fought for our freedom. The crowd murmured in agreement. Someone called out, "Make him leave. We don't feel safe with him here." Frank's hands began to shake, not from age or fear, but from something deeper. 60 years of buried memories were stirring. The faces of young men who never made it home. The promises made in foxholes. The weight of survival when others didn't, you know. What really bothers me, Chun was on a roll now. It's guys like you who make real veterans look bad. Real heroes who actually sacrificed for this country have to suffer because of frauds like you claiming to be something you're not. Frank closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, something had changed. The tired, defeated look was replaced by something steel-hard and unbreakable. Son, Frank said quietly, his voice carrying a new authority that made several people in the crowd take notice. You might want to stop talking now. But Chun was too caught up in his performance to recognize the warning. Oh, now you're going to threaten me? Perfect. He turned to the crowd. You all see this. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Aggressive, entitled, probably dangerous. A court reporter had joined the crowd, along with two other security guards who seemed less certain about Chun's approach. The businessman in the expensive suit moved closer, something about Frank's bearing catching his attention. Frank stood up fully now, and despite his age, his posture was unmistakably military. Straight spine, squared shoulders, eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. I said you might want to stop talking, Frank repeated, his voice steady and calm. Chun laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. Oh, what are you going to do, old man? Call your imaginary army buddies? The crowd was completely silent now. Even the children seemed to sense that something important was happening. Frank reached slowly into his shirt and pulled out two pieces of metal on a chain. Dog tags, worn smooth by decades of wear, but the letters still clearly visible to anyone who cared to look. I don't need to call anyone, son, Frank said. They're all dead. The courtroom lobby was now completely quiet, except for the sound of Frank's chain as he held up the tags. Chen's confident smirk began to fade as he realized the crowd's mood was shifting. The businessman in the expensive suit stepped forward. He was a veteran too, Navy, and he recognized something in Frank that others were just beginning to see. Excuse me, the businessman said to Chun, but I think you might want to read those tags before you say anything else. Chun looked annoyed. What's that supposed to mean? It means, the businessman replied, that you might be talking to someone who actually did serve. Someone who actually did sacrifice for your right to act like a fool in this courthouse. Frank looked at the businessman with gratitude but shook his head slightly. It's all right, son. He's young. He doesn't understand. But the businessman wasn't backing down. No, sir, it's not all right. He looked directly at Chun. Those dog tags don't lie. And neither do the men who wear them. Chun, now realizing that his audience was no longer on his side, tried to regain control. Look, even if he did serve, that doesn't give him the right to treat this place like his personal campground. The judge, who had been watching from the sidelines, finally stepped forward. Officer Chun, I think you should step back and let me handle this situation. But Frank held up his hand. No, sir, it's all right. He looked at Chen with eyes that held no anger, only sadness. Son, I've been coming here every Tuesday for 3 months trying to get records about my unit. About the men I served with in Korea. Men who died so you could have the freedom to stand here and speak your mind. The crowd was completely silent now. Even the children stopped fidgeting. I'm not homeless, Frank continued. I have a small apartment across town. I come here because I made a promise to the families of the men who didn't make it home. I promised I'd find their records, make sure their service was properly documented, make sure they weren't forgotten. Chun's face had gone pale. The judge stepped closer to Frank. His expression completely changed. "What unit, son?" the judge asked. Gently, Frank's voice grew quieter, but somehow filled the entire lobby. "2nd Infantry Division, Korea. We lost 18 men in one night on Hill 209. I was supposed to die with them, but I lived. And I've been trying to keep my promise to their families ever since." The businessman pulled out his phone, not to record, but to search something. After a few moments, his face went white. He showed his screen to the judge, who read it and then looked at Frank with something approaching awe. "Officer Chun," the judge said firmly, "I think you owe this man an apology." A very sincere apology. Chun looked confused and defensive. "Why? I was just doing my job." The businessman turned his phone so Chun could see the screen. "Because," he said quietly, "you just spent the last 10 minutes humiliating a Medal of Honor recipient." The words hung in the air like thunder. The crowd seemed to collectively hold its breath. Frank touched his chest again, where beneath his shirt, along with his dog tags, hung a small blue ribbon that he'd carried for 60 years but never worn in public. "Medal of Honor," the businessman repeated, "for single-handedly holding off an entire Chinese regiment while his wounded brothers were evacuated. 80 men lived because of him. 18 families got their sons back because Staff Sergeant Frank Morrison refused to abandon his post." The courthouse lobby was now silent except for the sound of Frank quietly putting his dog tags back under his shirt. Chun stood frozen, his face red with shame and embarrassment. Frank looked at the young security guard with kindness instead of anger. "Son, I didn't tell you this to make you feel bad. I told you because those 18 men I lost, they were young. Like you. They had families, dreams, futures ahead of them. I think about them every day." He picked up his duffel bag and stood with the dignity that no amount of worn clothing could diminish. "I'm not asking for special treatment," Frank said to the crowd. "I'm just asking for the chance to keep a promise I made 60 years ago, to make sure good men aren't forgotten." The judge stepped forward and extended his hand to Frank. "Sir, I'm Judge Harrison, and I want to personally ensure that you get every piece of documentation you need today." Frank shook the judge's hand, but his eyes went to Chun. The young security guard was struggling with emotions he'd never felt before. Shame, respect, and the crushing weight of understanding what he'd almost done. Frank walked over to Chun and placed a gentle hand on the young man's shoulder. "Son, I want you to do something for me. I want you to remember today. Not because you should feel bad, but because you should remember that every person you meet is carrying a story you know nothing about." Chun could barely speak. "Sir, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." Frank smiled, and for the first time that day, his eyes showed warmth instead of sadness. "Son, how could you have known? I don't wear my service on my sleeve. Most of us don't." The crowd began to disperse, but many stopped to shake Frank's hand or thank him for his service. The court reporter had tears in her eyes. The young mother, with her children, approached and quietly thanked him. But Frank's attention remained on Chun. The young security guard was clearly struggling with what had happened. "You know what the real lesson is here, son?" Frank asked gently. Chun shook his head, still too ashamed to speak. "The lesson is that dignity isn't something you earn by putting other people down. It's something you give to everyone, regardless of how they look or what you think you know about them." Frank reached into his duffel bag and pulled out a worn folder. Inside were dozens of names, ages, hometowns, the men he'd lost on Hill 209, the promise he'd been trying to keep. "These men," Frank said, showing Chun the list, "they died believing in something bigger than themselves. They died believing that kindness and respect and human dignity mattered. Don't let their sacrifice be for nothing by treating people the way you treated me today. Judge Harrison returned with a clerk from the records office. Sir, we have everything you need. And from now on, you won't need to wait on that bench. We'll set up a private office for you to work in whenever you need it. Frank nodded gratefully, but his eyes remained on Chun. The young man was reading the names in Frank's folder, beginning to understand the weight of what he'd almost destroyed. With his cruelty. Son, Frank said to Chun one final time, I want you to have something. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pen. It was a simple American flag, nothing fancy, but it had been with him through Korea and 60 years of keeping promises. This belonged to one of my men, Private Danny Walsh from Ohio. He was 19 years old when he died saving his squad. He would have wanted you to have it, not because you deserve it, but because everyone deserves a chance to be better than they were. Yesterday. Chun took the pin with shaking hands. Sir, I don't deserve this. I don't deserve anything from you. Frank smiled. Son, that's exactly why you do deserve it. Because now you understand the difference between earning something and being given grace. As Frank walked toward the records office with Judge Harrison, the courthouse lobby slowly returned to normal. But everyone who had witnessed what happened carried something different with them. The businessman called his father, a Vietnam veteran, just to say he loved him. The court reporter went home and researched local veteran services. The young mother taught her children about respect and dignity. And Officer Chun? He kept that flag pin on his uniform every day for the rest of his career. And he never again judged anyone by their appearance. Because he learned that day that heroes don't always look like heroes. Sometimes they look like tired old men with worn clothes and stories too heavy to carry alone. Frank Morrison kept his promise. He found the records for all 18 men. He contacted their families. He made sure their service was documented and honored. He made sure they weren't forgotten. And in doing so, he taught everyone who met him that dignity isn't about what you've accomplished or what you wear or how much money you have. It's about how you treat other people when you think nobody important is watching. Because someone is always watching. Someone is always learning. And sometimes that someone is carrying dog tags and a 60-year-old promise beneath a faded flannel shirt.